The iron vow drifted quietly through the void, its dark hull scarred from years of border runs and black market jobs. Captain Jackson Morrow stood on the bridge, arms crossed behind his back, eyes fixed on the holographic star map. He wasn't a man of many words, but the slight tension in his jaw told his crew enough. Something didn't feel right. They had arrived at Outpost Station X, 92, an aging structure suspended at the edge of Imperial territory, where law ended and chaos began. The station was shaped like a broken ring, with mismatched sections patched on from decades of expansions and emergency repairs. It wasn't pretty, but it was neutral ground, technically under no one's control. That made it perfect for smugglers, traders, mercenaries, and people like Jackson. "Docking clamps engaged," said Sarah, his pilot and longtime friend. "Station's traffic control cleared us for Bay 12. Jackson nodded. "Keep the ship sealed. I'll take Deke and Rilo for supplies." He grabbed his coat, worn leather, faded black, lined with old Earth flag patches. Deke, the team's engineer, followed with a datapad in hand, muttering about power cores and faulty stabilizers. Rilo, their muscle, adjusted the plasma rifle slung across his back. The three of them stepped out onto the docking tunnel, boots clanking on the metal floor as the airlock hissed open. Inside the station, the air smelled of grease, sweat, and recycled oxygen. Flickering lights overhead buzzed faintly. Traders shouted over each other in a dozen alien tongues. The hum of machines, conversations, and distant sirens made it hard to think. They passed a pair of tall, insectoid traders from the Krell Syndicate. One of them paused and looked at Jackson with what might have been recognition or suspicion. Jackson kept moving. The Empire's presence here was light. Just a small outpost office and a board patrol ship circling above. X-92 wasn't worth full control. It served as a border post, nothing more. Still, Jackson never trusted any place the Empire could watch. He didn't like being watched. As they neared a supply depot, Deke's comm crackled. Static, then a scrambled signal. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," Deke said, pulling out his datapad. "It's not from the station." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Show me." The signal was old, layered in encryption, barely holding together. But the metadata flagged it with two red words: human priority. Jackson stiffened. "Where's it coming from?" "Looks like Asteroid Cluster 9A, just past the neutral zone. About a day's flight out." Rilo frowned. "That's deep into ghost space." "We're not the rescue type, Captain." Jackson didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the blinking signal. Human-coded distress beacons hadn't been used in years, not since the Empire forced human sectors into isolation. Everyone in the galaxy knew the law. The Galactic Empire's Law 7.31 Alpha. Under no circumstances shall any Imperial fleet, agent, or satellite interfere with human affairs. Observation only. Non-contact enforced. It was the only law the Empire followed without question. Not because they respected humans, but because they feared them. Too wild. Too unpredictable. Too dangerous. Jackson exhaled slowly. "Could be a trap. Could be nothing. Could be someone alive," Deke said softly. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence. Outside, station life buzzed on, uncaring. Finally, Jackson spoke. "Prep the ship. We're checking it out." They returned to the iron vow and sealed the hatch. Jackson took one last look at the station through the viewport. He had a feeling they wouldn't be back. As the ship undocked and pulled away, a shadow moved in a dark corner of the station. An alien figure, tall and slender, tapped a comm unit and whispered something in Imperial code. The hunt had already begun. The iron vow glided through the black, quiet stretch of space toward the asteroid cluster known as Sector 9A. There were no trade routes here. No patrols. Just dead rock and cold silence. Captain Jackson Morrow stood near the command console, staring at the flickering beacon on the holographic map. The distress signal was still active, weak and barely holding together, but it pulsed like a heartbeat, calling to them. "Signal strength's dropping," Deke said from his station. "If we don't reach it soon, we might lose it entirely." Jackson nodded. "How far?" 30 minutes. Rilo checked his weapons locker. "That's 30 minutes too long if it's a trap." Jackson didn't argue. He knew the risks. Human-coded beacons hadn't been used in over 50 years. The Empire had made sure of that. Every human colony was forced to go silent after the wars. Anyone who resisted had been crushed or disappeared. The law was clear, no interference. Not from them, not from anyone, which made this signal not just rare, but illegal. As they entered the asteroid field, the ship's lights swept across massive floating rocks, some the size of cities. Jackson kept his eyes on the radar. There was no sign of activity, no ships, no stations, just one small energy signature buried deep inside a cratered asteroid. There, Sarah pointed. It's hollowed out. Looks like an artificial base. Jackson narrowed his eyes. Bring us in, slow and quiet. The ship drifted into the cavernous entrance, sliding between jagged rocks like a ghost. The internal lights flickered to life as they passed through a thin energy field, some kind of stealth shield. Inside was a hidden structure, small, dark, metallic, and half buried in rock. It looked abandoned, but the signal was definitely coming from inside. Atmosphere stable, Deke said. Power is low, but running. Suit up, Jackson ordered. We're going in. The team moved through the empty halls of the station, flashlights cutting through dust and shadow. It smelled of metal and something older, something sour, like rot. The rooms were strange. Too clean. Too quiet. Rilo moved ahead, weapon ready. This doesn't feel like any human outpost. These walls, they're Imperial design. Jackson felt his chest tighten. Keep moving. They reached a sealed door marked with strange hybrid symbols. Imperial code mixed with human lettering. Deke cracked it open, and the door groaned as it slid aside. What they saw froze them in place. It was a lab. Rows of containment pods lined the walls. Inside each one was a person, pale, unconscious, and wired with tubes and scanners. Men, women, even a few children. One of the pods had cracked glass. A man inside was dead, face frozen in horror, body stiff. Deke swallowed hard. They were experimenting on them. Rilo checked the corner terminal. This is deep core tech. Empire grade. He paused, staring at the screen. But these are all human prisoners. Jackson walked slowly past the pods, fists clenched. The faces looked hollow. Broken. Used. Then he stopped in front of one pod and stared. Inside was a girl, no older than 16, with dark hair and a scar on her cheek. Jackson recognized her. Her name was Lena Ward. She was from the same colony he had grown up on. He had seen her as a child, before the Empire had raided their settlement and taken everyone. That was 20 years ago. Jackson turned to Deke. Get everything off their system. Every file, every log. Deke hesitated. Jax, if we do this, they'll come for us. I know, he said. Do it anyway. As Deke worked, a sudden beep echoed through the lab. A hologram snapped to life in the center of the room. Tall, slender, dressed in long black robes of Imperial design. High Executor Viral. His alien face was calm, but his yellow eyes burned with cold authority. Captain Morrow, he said, you've entered a restricted zone. You have two choices. Leave immediately and forget what you've seen, or face the consequences of violating Imperial law. Jackson stared him down. You're breaking your own law. You're interfering with human lives. These subjects are not citizens. They are threats to peace, Viral replied. They were taken for their own containment. For your safety, Captain, you're torturing them. We are ensuring order. Something humans have failed to provide for centuries. Jackson stepped forward. You don't get to make that call. Viral's eyes narrowed. You are now classified as hostile. Leave this station and forget it exists, or be hunted. The hologram vanished. Silence filled the room. Deke looked at Jackson. What now? Jackson clenched his jaw. Now, we show the galaxy what they're doing. They loaded the stolen data onto the ship, leaving the lab behind, but not the memory. As the iron valve flew back into space, the distress beacon finally went dark. But the real signal, the one Jackson planned to send, had only just begun. The iron vow tore through space, its engines burning hot as Captain Jackson Morrow stood at the center of the bridge. The crew was silent. No one spoke, but everyone knew what had happened. They had crossed a line, a big one. Jackson's fingers gripped the rail beside the command console. He stared straight ahead, though his mind was still in that cold lab, among the pods, among the stolen lives. The face of the girl, Lena Ward, still haunted him. She had been just a child when the Empire raided their colony. He remembered her running through the sand, chasing a ball, laughing. Now, she floated inside a tube, unconscious and pale, as if frozen in time. That wasn't science. That was cruelty. That was control. And it had to stop. Captain, Deke said quietly, I've finished decrypting some of the lab files. Jackson turned. It's bad, Deke went on. These weren't random captures. The Empire is targeting specific humans, anyone with strong neural resistance or high adaptability. They're trying to change them, break them, maybe even reprogram them. Jackson's jaw clenched. Weapons. Deke nodded grimly. Living ones. If they succeed, they'll have soldiers with human instincts, but no human will. Sarah's voice came from the pilot's seat. There's no way the Senate approved this. They didn't, Deke said. These operations are off books, run by Viral and a few loyal commanders, hidden from public records. If we get this info to the right people, it could expose everything. We'll need a secure link, Jackson said. Encrypted, anonymous. Empire's eyes are everywhere. Rilo leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Before that, we need to talk about the other problem. Everyone turned to him. We just declared war, Rilo said bluntly. You think Viral's gonna let this go? He's probably already got ships tracking us. We're not freedom fighters, Jax. We're a 5-person crew with a ship held together by tape and curses. Jackson didn't respond right away. He stepped away from the console and looked out the viewing window. Stars glittered beyond the glass, silent and cold. The same stars that had watched Earth burn, colonies fall, and soldiers die. He turned back to his crew. I didn't ask for a war, he said calmly. But I'm not going to let them do that to our people again. Not after what we saw. Not after Lena. She might not even survive, Rilo said. She might, Jackson replied. And if she does, she deserves a world that knows the truth. Deke spoke up. I know someone who can help. A former resistance data broker, goes by Quill. Hides out near the Tannic Rift. If anyone can help us get this info to the right channels, it's him. Quill. Jackson narrowed his eyes. Didn't he betray half the resistance for money? He betrayed the people who betrayed him first, Deke said. He's not loyal, but he is useful. Jackson gave a slow nod. Plot a course. We'll take the long way, avoid trade routes, and keep comms dark. As the crew moved to their stations, Jackson stayed behind for a moment, thinking. He had been a soldier once, during the final days of the human rebellions. He had seen good men die, watched entire settlements vanish in fire. After the ceasefire, the Empire gave up controlling humans directly and passed their one golden law. Don't interfere. It had been a relief back then, a chance to breathe. Now, that lie had cracked wide open. Later that night cycle, Jackson sat alone in the ship's small observation bay. Stars drifted slowly outside the window. He took a sip of water and stared into the darkness. Sarah entered, sitting across from him. You sure about this? She asked. No, Jackson admitted. You know there's no turning back now. I know. They sat in silence for a moment. Sarah looked at him. Back on X-92, before we left, I saw something. What? An Imperial spy. Krell species. Tall, black coat. He watched us the whole time. Jackson frowned. So they were already tracking us before we got the signal. Looks like it. He stood up. Then we need to move fast. Hours later, the Iron Vow dropped out of hyperspace near the edge of the Tannic Rift. The space was jagged, full of dead satellite fragments and broken mining stations. It was a good place to hide. Too good. As they approached the location Deke had for Quill's hideout, the radar lit up. Multiple heat signatures. Sarah called out. 3 ships. Fast. Interceptors. Empire. Jackson asked. Reading Imperial codes, but masked. They're trying to look like pirates. They're not wasting time, Rilo muttered, locking in weapons. Jackson grabbed the comm, braced for combat. This was never going to be easy. The ship shook as the first blast hit their shields. Outside, in the cold black of space, the Empire had come hunting. And this time, they weren't hiding behind laws. The Iron Vow shook violently as another plasma blast struck the rear shield. Sparks flew from a wall panel, and the lights on the bridge flickered. Captain Jackson Morrow gripped the edge of the console, his jaw tight, voice steady. Return fire, he said calmly. On it, Rilo growled, his hands already moving across the weapons controls. Targeting lead ship. Outside, space flared with light as the Iron Vow fired back. The first Imperial interceptor rolled hard to avoid the shot, but the second took a direct hit to its wing. Fire burst from its hull as it spiraled into the debris field. They're coming in fast, Sarah warned from the pilot's seat. Too fast for a straight fight. Then we don't give them one, Jackson said. Sarah, take us into the wreck zone. You sure? No. Do it anyway. Sarah slammed the throttle forward, and the iron valve plunged into the thick graveyard of broken satellites and dead ships. The debris field was dense, twisting metal, spinning hulls, and shattered domes. It was dangerous to fly through, but it gave them cover. The two remaining interceptors followed. On the bridge, Deke was working fast. Captain, I've wiped all traceable signals and scrambled our ID code. We'll look like a freighter if they lose line of sight. Good, Jackson said. Let's make them lose it. Sarah weaved the ship through narrow gaps between twisted space wreckage. The engines roared, dodging a spinning communications tower by inches. Behind them, one of the interceptors clipped a floating structure, its wings sheared clean off. It spun into the shadows and vanished in a burst of flame. Last one still on us. Rilo barked. He's clever. He's desperate, Jackson said. Then he saw it. A collapsed mining barge ahead, its open cargo bay hanging like a steel mouth. Sarah, head for that barge. Cut power right before we enter. Sarah understood instantly. We're going dark. We're becoming wreckage. The ship surged forward. Just as they reached the opening, Sarah shut the engines. The lights dimmed. The hum of systems faded. The iron vow drifted silently into the shadow of the mining barge. Outside, the last interceptor swept past the opening, scanning the area. Then it turned and flew off, searching elsewhere. Inside the bridge, the crew let out slow breaths. That was too close, Deke muttered. Too close is still alive, Jackson replied. They waited 5 more minutes before powering up again. The ship's systems came back online, and the screens lit with soft blue light. The stars outside blinked quietly, calm again. We're clear, Sarah said, her voice low. But Jackson wasn't calm. Not yet. Later, they regrouped in the ship's common room. The air was heavy with silence. Even Rilo had removed his armor and sat quietly, eyes lowered. This isn't going away, Deke said. They're going to keep coming. Viral wants us dead, and the longer we hold on to this data, the bigger the target on our backs. Jackson stood with his arms crossed. We have to reach Quill. He's still our best shot. Sarah frowned. And what if he sells us out? He's not known for loyalty. He's known for hating the Empire, Jackson replied. And he has reach. Rilo leaned forward. We need to be ready. This isn't just some mission anymore. This is war, again, just like the rebellion. Jackson looked around at his crew. I didn't want this, he said. None of us did. But we saw what they're doing. We can't unsee it. We can't pretend it doesn't matter. He paused, his voice steady but full of quiet fire. This ship is small. Our names aren't in any history books. But right now, we have something they're willing to kill for. That means we're dangerous. That means we matter. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Sarah stood. I'm in. Deke raised his hand. You already knew I was. Rilo just grunted. Fine. Let's burn them. The next day, they reached the hidden coordinates for Quill's base, an old mining colony buried inside a moon's crust. The place looked dead from the outside, but as they approached, a hangar door opened automatically. Inside, rusted towers and flickering lights revealed a maze of corridors, terminals, and weapons turrets. A voice greeted them over the comms. Well, the voice crackled. Captain Jackson Morrow. I was wondering when your face would pop back up in trouble. Hello. Quill, Jackson replied. The ship landed, and they stepped out. Quill waited near a scaffold, draped in a long coat, his hair gray and wild, his eyes sharp. He smirked. I heard a rumor. You found something the Empire wants buried. Jackson held up the drive. Not a rumor. Proof. Quill's grin faded. You better come inside, he said. You just became the most wanted man in the galaxy. The inside of Quill's base was dim and cluttered, like a forgotten war museum. Walls lined with old monitors, rusted control panels, and half-functioning machines buzzed with low power. It smelled of oil, dust, and smoke. Jackson followed Quill through narrow hallways, lit by flickering lights, while the rest of the crew trailed behind. I don't like this place, Rilo muttered, watching every shadow. Quill chuckled. That's the point, Muscleman. People don't come here unless they're desperate or dead already. Jackson ignored the comment. Can you open the data? Quill stopped at a large metal door, placed his hand on the scanner, and stepped into what looked like a personal war room. Screens lined the walls, some showing old news footage, others filled with static. At the center was a long, cracked console surrounded by chairs. "Plug it in," he said. Deke stepped forward, inserted the data chip, and tapped a few keys. The main screen flared to life. Footage began playing. Clear recordings from the secret lab. Human subjects in pods. Needles, scans, genetic mutation logs. Audio files of Imperial scientists reporting to High Executor Viral. One video showed Viral himself authorizing the experiments. Quill leaned forward, frowning. "This is bad. Real bad." "It's the truth," Jackson said. "We want it out." Quill stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned to face them. "You realize what happens if I send this," he said. "Every human colony will rise. Neutral systems will panic. The Empire will retaliate, fast and without mercy." "Then let them," Jackson replied. "They broke their own law. People need to know." Quill scratched his chin, thinking, "I can send this to the outernet hubs. Independent journalists, rebel feeds, pirate networks. The Empire won't be able to silence it once it spreads." "Do it," Jackson said without hesitation. Quill nodded and turned back to the console. "Uploading now. It'll bounce across a dozen relay stations. Hard to trace, but not impossible." Sarah glanced at Jackson. "What if they come here?" "They will," Jackson said. "We don't run this time." The upload bar began to fill, slowly at first, then faster. 10%, 25%, 40%. Then, alarms blared. Quill spun around. Unmarked ship just jumped in. Heavy armor. No transponder. "That's not pirates." Jackson turned to his crew. "It's him." Outside, the ground shook as the enemy ship landed above the base. Dust rained from the ceiling. Sirens wailed louder. "Finish the upload," Jackson told Quill. "We'll buy you time." He ran back toward the landing bay with Sarah, Rilo, and Deke close behind. They grabbed weapons and took positions near the main entrance. Through the thick door, they heard the sound of engines cooling and then the hiss of airlocks opening. Moments later, the door exploded inward. Smoke and fire blasted across the room. Figures stepped through the cloud. Imperial soldiers in black armor, rifles raised. Behind them walked a tall, thin figure wrapped in a long cloak. High Executor Viral. He moved like a shadow, slow and sure. "I gave you a chance, Morrow," he said, voice echoing coldly. "You chose defiance." Jackson stepped forward, gun raised. "You chose cruelty." "Order," Viral corrected. "And you humans never understood it." Gunfire erupted. Rilo charged forward, slamming into two soldiers with brute force. Sarah fired from cover, taking out a third. Deke worked the side panel, trying to close a blast door to trap the rest. Jackson moved through the fight like a soldier trained by fire. Fast, precise, relentless. He met Viral in the center of the room. They didn't speak. They fought. Viral drew a sleek energy blade, hissing with blue light. Jackson blocked with a metal rod pulled from a broken fixture, dodging and countering. Sparks flew with every clash. "You're only delaying your extinction," Viral sneered. "We've survived worse," Jackson growled. The fight was brutal. Jackson's shoulder burned from a shallow cut. Viral moved with alien grace, but Jackson was faster, angrier. With a sharp twist and a final strike, Jackson knocked the blade from Viral's hand and drove him to the ground. "Look around," Jackson said, panting. "You lost." Viral's eyes flicked toward the console in the back room. Quill stood there, smiling. Upload complete. The entire galaxy had just seen the truth. Viral went still. Jackson stood over him. "It's over." Viral whispered something Jackson couldn't hear, then bit down on something hidden in his mouth. His body went limp. Rilo approached. "Dead." Jackson nodded. "By his own hand." They returned to the control room. The footage had already spread across the networks. Messages from human colonies flooded in. People were already rising. The Empire would deny, delay, maybe even attack. But the lie was gone. The silence was broken. Jackson watched the screen as the faces of those prisoners played again. He had done what he set out to do. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The iron vow floated above the scorched surface of the old moon base. Smoke still curled from the craters where Imperial troops had landed, and pieces of Viral's ship lay shattered across the blackened ground. Inside, the crew worked in silence, each person busy with repairs, cleanup, or quiet thought. Captain Jackson Morrow stood alone near the forward viewport, staring into space. His jacket was torn at the shoulder, bandages visible beneath. He looked older now, tired, but steady. The truth was out. The footage of the Imperial lab had spread like wildfire. Every major human colony had received it. Pirate feeds, resistance channels, and even neutral alien networks had shared it. The galaxy had seen the Empire's secret. Humans experimented on, violated, treated like objects. And the reaction was explosive. Deke entered the bridge holding a datapad. Reports are pouring in, he said. There's rioting in Sector 12. Mars colonies are demanding full separation. The Drelk Alliance just cut ties with the Empire. They're calling the experiments a war crime. Jackson nodded slowly. What about the Empire? Official statement says it was a rogue operation. Viral acted alone. They're trying to bury him. Let them try, Jackson said. Rilo entered next, wiping grease from his hands. Engines are stable. Weapons recharged. Shields at 78%. We can move anytime. Sarah followed behind. And we should. Rumors say the Empire's sending cleanup teams. They can't touch us directly. Law still stands, but they'll find a way. Jackson turned to face them all. We won't run, he said. But we won't stay still either. They stood in a rough circle now, his crew. His family. Each of them had risked everything for this moment. They weren't soldiers, not anymore. But they were still fighting, for something bigger than revenge. For years, Jackson said quietly, the Empire used fear to keep us silent. They said we were dangerous, unpredictable, too wild to control. He looked around at them. They were right. They left Quill's base behind, burning the landing pad to the ground before launch. It was too exposed now. Quill chose to stay behind, slipping back into the data streams where he felt safe. He promised to keep spreading the message, to keep telling the truth. The Iron Vow jumped to deep space. No destination, just distance, time, safety. Jackson stood at the console that night, watching the star map shift. He thought of Lena Ward, still in stasis, recovering slowly in the medbay. She hadn't woken up yet, but she was alive. That was enough for now. Captain, Sarah said from behind him, we're getting a message from the colony on Hesta Prime. They want to talk. Offer support. Good, he said. Tell them we'll answer soon. He looked once more into the stars. He thought of the law, the one the Empire had written after the human wars. Never interfere with human business. They meant it as a warning. Now it was a shield. Let them fear humans. Let them remember what happens when they cross the line. Because the message was clear, we protect our own. And this time, the whole galaxy was watching. Jackson turned off the console and walked toward his crew, ready for whatever came next. They weren't running anymore. They were free.